So there's two stories in this one book. We're going to start reading Cowboy Crazy tonight. I'm going to try and knock out a lot of pages with Cowboy Crazy with you. What I've done is given you enough pages of each story to make you want to go pick up this book and read it. So let me read you a little bit of the tantalizing cover on the back. And I know that's not only going to wet your whistle, but the pages I have to share with you, they're going to wet your whistle. A secret twin, a secret baby. Things are heating up in the Lone Star State. Going cowboy crazy. Slate Calhoun is in a quandary. The woman in his truck may look like his longtime flame, Hope Scruggs, yet the way she feels in his arms is altogether new. By the time he discovers that equally beautiful woman is her identical twin sister, Faith, he's head over spurs in love with her, and she's got her own designs on Slate. Okay. Now, Katie Lane, Katielane, is definitely one of my new favorite writers. And what I enjoyed most, I'm just going to go ahead and read this, and I'll probably be reading it a lot here, is the about her. She's a firm believer that love conquers all and laughter is the best medicine, which is why you'll find plenty of humor and happily ever afters in her contemporary and Western contemporary romance novels. A USA Today bestseller, she has written numerous series, including Deep in the Heart of Texas, Hunk for the Holidays, Overnight Billionaires, Tender Heart of Texas, The Brides of Bliss, Texas, and The Bad Boy Ranch. Katie lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and when she's not writing, she enjoys eating her chocolate dark, please. We have that in common, Katie. And snuggling with her high school sweetheart and her cane terrier, Rue. And so, Katie, awesome job here. It says, to James, the boy from Texas who gave me the dream. And in the acknowledgments, it takes a village to get a first novel published. At least it took a village for this one. From Mrs. Hart, the 5th grade teacher who had me write my very first fictional story to the charming and hospitable people of West Texas. Unfortunately, I said I have only one page to show my appreciation. That said, thank you, Alex Logan, my wonderful editor, for this page and all the pages after it. My book couldn't have found a more nurturing and loving home than Grand Central. And a very special thanks to my amazing agent, Laura Bradford, who believed in me and refused to stop searching until she found the home. Speaking of home, I need to thank my husband for his patience and understanding. Jamie, I love the quote-unquote rubber chicken you make for me on nights that I work late, and your unwavering belief in my book is going to be the next Pulitzer Prize winner. And how I do thank the most beautiful and intelligent daughters in the world, Tiffany, and for the hours spent working on my website, and Aubrey for her support and advice. And then from there are my sisters, Christy, Sandy, who went over the storylines and read rough drafts without complaint. What a sisterhood of love I have. Finally, I'd like to thank my mother and father, Helen Marie, Joseph Abner, for giving me the kind of safe and loving childhood where Skinny could wander around in her own little dream world, quote unquote. Now we're starting on chapter 1. So here we go. If you think my truck is big, Faith Aldridge did a double take, but the bold back letters of the bumper sticker remained the same. Appalled, she read through the rest of the sign plastered on the tail end of the huge truck. Don't mess with Texas. Rebel born and rebel bred, and when I die I'll be rebel dead. I live by the 3 B's, beer, brawls, and broads. Crude runs through my veins. She could agree with the last one. Whoever drove the mammoth-sized vehicle was crude and arrogant and chauvinistic, and a perfect example of rednecks her Aunt Jillian had warned her about. Not that her Aunt Jillian had ever met a redneck, but she'd seen Jeff Foxworthy on TV, and that was enough to make her fear for her niece's safety when traveling in a state filled with punchlines for that statement. You might be a redneck if you have a bumper sticker that refers to the size of your bleep. The front tire of her Volvo hit yet another pothole, pulling her attention away from the bumper sticker and back to the quest for an empty parking space. There was no defined parking space in a small dirt lot, but even without the painted lines, the occupants of the bar had formed fairly neat rows, all except for the crude redneck whose truck was blatantly parked on the sidewalk by the front door. Someone should report him to the police. Someone who wasn't intimidated by law enforcement officers and didn't worry about criminal retaliation. Faith found an empty space at the very end of the lot and started to pull in when she noticed the beat-up door on the Ford Taurus next to her. Pulling back out, she inclined closer to the cinder block wall, then turned off the car, unhooked her seat belt, and grabbed her purse from beneath the seat. Ignoring the trembling in her hand, she pulled out the tube of lip gloss she had purchased in the drugstore in Oklahoma City, but it was harder to ignore the apprehensive blue eyes that stared back at her from the tiny lip mirror on the visor. Harder, but not impossible. She liberally coated her lips with a glistening fuchsia of passion fruit, a color that didn't match her plain brown turtleneck or her conservative beige pants, or even the bright red high heels she'd gotten at the Payless shoe store in Amarillo when she stopped for lunch. A strong gust of warm wind whipped around the curls of Faith's face, and as she stepped out of the car, she brushed her hair back and glanced up. Only a few wispy clouds marred the deep blue of the September sky. Still, it might be a good idea to get her jacket and a suitcase in the trunk, just in case it got colder when the sun went down. Of course, she didn't plan on staying at the bar past dark. In fact, she didn't plan on staying at the bar at all, just long enough to get some answers. After closing the door, she pushed the button on her keychain twice until the Volvo beeped. Then a few feet away, she pushed it again, just to be sure. One of her fellow computer programmers said she had OCD, overly cautious disorder. Her co-worker was probably right, although there was nothing cautious about walking into a bar filled with men who paraded around with their egomaniacal thoughts on their bumpers of their trucks. But she didn't have a choice. At 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, this was the only place she'd found open in the small town. As Faith walked past the truck parked by the door, she couldn't help but stare. Up at the clothes that looked bigger and much dirtier. Mud clung to the deep treaded tires, hung like stalactites from the fender wells, splattered over the faded red paint and blotchy gray primer of the door, and flecked the side of the window. A window her head barely reached, and in her heels she was a good 5'5". Well, maybe not 5 inches, maybe closer to 4, but it was still mind-boggling that a vehicle would be jacked up to such heights. What kind of brute owned it anyway? Obviously the kind who thought went with his large member. The kind who didn't think it was overkill not to have one, but 2 huge flags. One American and the other one who knew. Hanging limply from poles on either side of the back window, a back window that displayed a decal of a little cartoon boy taking a dump on the Toyota symbol. 2 blue-starred football helmets and a gun rack with 1 empty slot. Faith froze. On second thought, maybe she wouldn't ask questions at this bar. Maybe she would just drive down the main street again and try to find some other place open. Some place that didn't serve alcohol to armed patrons. Some place where she wouldn't end up rebel dead. Not that she was even close to being a rebel. Standing in the parking lot of Bootlegger's Bar in Bramble, Texas was probably the most rebellious thing she ever done in her life. If she had a bumper sticker, it would read, "Conformist born, conformist bred, and when she dies, she'll be conformist dead." But she just didn't want to be a conformist dead yet. Unfortunately, she could get back in her leather upholstered security of her Volvo, but the battered door of the bar opened and 2 men walked out. Not walked, exactly, more like strutted. In the wide felt cowboy hats and tight jeans with their large silver belt buckles as big as brunch plates. Faith ducked back behind the monster truck, hoping they'd walk right past without noticing her. Except the sidewalk was uneven as the parking lot, and one pointy toe of her high heel got caught in the crack, forcing her to grab onto the tailgate or end up with her nose planted in the pavement. And as soon as her fingers hit the cold metal of the alarm went off. A loud howling that raised the hairs on her arm and had her stumbling back, praying that at least one of the men was packing so he could shoot the thing that was just risen up from the bed of the truck. "For crying out loud, Buster, shut up," one of the men shouted over the ear-splitting noise. The howling stopped as quickly as it started. Shaken, Faith could only stare at the large 4-legged creature with its mouth closed. The dog didn't look threatening as much as cute. Soulful brown eyes looked back at her from a woolly face. While she recovered from her scare, it ambled her over to the end of the truck and leaned its head out. Faith stepped back. She wasn't good with dogs, or cats, gerbills, birds, hamsters, or even fish. Pretty much anything living. She had a rabbit once, but only after 3 months of its care it died of a nervous condition. Hope? The name spoken by the tall, lean cowboy with the warm, coffee-colored skin caused her stomach to drop, and she swirled around to look behind her. No one was there. "Baby, is that you?" The man's Texas twang was so thick it seemed contrived. Faith started to shake her head, but he let out a whoop and had her in his arms before she could accomplish it, and she was whirled around in a circle against his wiry body before he tossed her over to his friend, who had a soft belly and a chest wide enough to land a 747. "Welcome home, little bit." The large man gave her a rough smack on the lips, and the whiskers of his mustache goatee tickling. He pulled her back, and his blue hairs narrowed. "And what the hell did you do to your hair?" "She cut it, you idiot." With a contagious grin, the lean cowboy reached out and ruffled her hair. "That's what all them Hollywood types do, cut off their crowning glory, like it's nothing more than tangled fishing line." He cocked his head. "But I guess it don't look so bad. It's kind of cute in an ugly, short kind of way. And I like the color. What's that called, streaking?" The man who just held her in the fist-like grip grinned, tobacco juice seeping from the corners of his mouth. "No, Kenny, that's what we did senior year." "Right." Kenny's dark eyes twinkled. "But it's like streaking, tinting, stripping, highlighting. That's it." He whacked her on the back so hard that she wondered if she cracked a rib. "Sure Lane did that, but it don't look so good as yours. She looked like a little polecat when it was all said and done. Does she know you're back? Hot damn, she's gonna shit a brick when she sees you. She's missed you a lot." His eyes lost some of the twinkle. "Of course, we all have, but especially Slate." He grabbed her arm and tugged her toward the door. "I can't wait to see his face when he sees you. Of course, he ain't real happy right now. The dogs lost last night, 21-7, but I'm sure you'll put an end to his depression." Faith barely listened to the man's constant chatter as he dragged her through the door into the dark, smoky depths of the bar. She felt lightheaded, and emotion crept up the back of her throat. Did they really look so much alike that these men couldn't tell the difference? It made sense, but it was still hard to absorb. All this time she thought that she was an only child, and to realize. "Here!" Kenny slapped his back cowboy hat down on his head and tipped it forward. "We don't want to start a stampede until Slate gets to see you. Not that anyone would recognize you in that get-up." He shook his head as his gaze slid down her body to the tips of her high heels. "Please don't tell me you got rid of your boots, Hope. Getting rid of all that gorgeous hair's bad enough." Faith opened her mouth, every intention of telling him that she never owned a pair of western boots to get rid of. Or she had the long, gorgeous hair, for that matter. But she could. He tucked his arm and dragged her past the long bar and around the crowded dance floor, with his friend following obediently behind. "So how's Hollywood treating you?" Kenny yelled over the loud country music, and then waved a hand at the group. A woman who called out his name. "It's been way too long since you came home for a visit. I bet you've been busy knocking them Hollywood directors on their butts. Nobody can act like our little Hope. You flat killed me when you was Annie and Get Your Gun. Of course, you almost did kill Colt. Not that I blame you, since he was the one who switched out that blank with live ammunition. But the crowd sure went crazy when you shot them stage lights, and I still get chills thinking about it." Chills ran through Faith's body as well. Hollywood, actor, live ammo. Her mind whirled with information she received in such a short span of time. "Yep, sure ain't been the same without you. Can barely go into Josephine's diner without getting all misty-eyed. Of course, those onions Josie fries up will do that to a person. Still, nobody serves up chicken fried steak as pretty as you did. Rachel Dean is a nice old gal, but them man hands of hers sure can kill an appetite." Kitty glanced down at her and then stopped so suddenly as his friend ran into from behind. From beneath the wide brim of her hat she watched his dark brows slide together. "Hey, what's the matter with you anyway? How come you're letting me haul you around without cussing me up one side down the other?" Probably because Faith didn't cuss up one side or down the other, and because she wasn't a pretty waitress who was brave enough to get on stage and perform in the front of a crowd of people, or move away from a familiarity of home for the bright lights of Hollywood. Hollywood. Hope was in Hollywood? For a second, Faith felt an overwhelming surge of disappointment, but it was quickly followed by the realization that all the hundreds of miles she traveled had not been in vain. This was where Hope had grown up, and where Faith would find her answers to some of the questions that plagued her for the last year. Except once Kenny found out that she wasn't Hope, she probably wouldn't get any more answers. She'd probably be tossed out of the bar without even a "y'all come back now, you hear?" She'd been a stranger, an uppity Easterner with that weird accent, chopped off ugly hair, and not one pair of cowboy boots to her name. A person who was far from the popular hometown hope he described as Faith's Volvo was from the redneck's truck. But what choice did she have? She had never been good at lying, besides once she opened her mouth the truth would come out unless she didn't open her mouth. Unless she kept her mouth shut and let everyone assume what they would. It wouldn't exactly be a lie, more like a fib. And fibs were okay as long as they didn't hurt anyone. And who would possibly get hurt if she allowed these people to think that she was someone else just for a little while longer? Hope wasn't there, and Faith wouldn't be either after tonight. Swallowing down the last of her reservations, she tapped her throat and mouthed, "Laryngitis." Those deep eyes grew more puzzled. "My throat," she croaked in a bare whisper. His brows lifted. "Oh, your throat's hoarse. Well, that explains it." He gathered her back against his side and moved toward her again. "For a second I thought I had someone else in my arms besides Miss Hog Caller of Haskins County 5 years running." He chuckled deep in his chest. "Course, Slate's gonna love this. He always said that you talked too much. Hey, Kenny, what you got there?" A skinny man stepped off the dance floor with a young woman in tight t-shirt that was keeping it country stretched across her chest, an even tighter pair of jeans that pushed up a white roll of flesh over her tooled leather belt. "None of your damn beeswax flesh." Kenny winked at the young woman. "Hey, Twyla." She scowled. "I thought you was going home, Kenny Jean." "I was, darling, but I have something to take care of first." "I got eyes, Kenny, and if this is something you need to take care of, then don't be calling me to go to homecoming game with you. I got other plans." "Now, don't be getting all bent out of shape, honey." Kenny yelled at the woman retreating back. "Man, that gal's got a temper." He chuckled. "Almost as bad as yours." Faith didn't have a temper, at least not one that she had witnessed. "Now, don't go ruin the surprise, Hope. Let me do all the talking." He shot her a weak grin. "Sorry, I forgot about your voice. Man, is Slate gonna be surprised." For the first time since allowing this man to take charge of her life, Faith started to get worried. Surprises weren't always well received. Her mother had dropped a few surprises months before she passed away, a surprise that Faith was still trying to recover from. But this was different. It sounded like Slate and Hope had been good friends, and he would probably whoop like Kenny had done, give her a big hug and possibly a little more razor burn, and hopefully a lot more information before she made her excuses and slipped out the door. And no one would be the wiser, except maybe Hope, if she came home before Faith found her. But that wouldn't happen. Faith had every intention of finding Hope as soon as possible. She might not be a rebel, but she was tenacious. Tenacious, but a little bit more than scared when Kenny pulled her aside to her room with 2 pool tables, a gaggle of cowboy hats, and a sea of blue denim. The light in the room was better, but the smoke was thicker, the smoke softer, and the conversation even louder. They hesitated by the door for a few seconds as Kenny looked around, and when Faith was hauled across the room to the far table where a man in crumpled straw cowboy hat had just leaned over to take a shot. Faith had barely taken note of the strong hand and lean forearm that stretched out and rolled up the sleeve of her blue western shirt before Kenny whipped out the hat off her head and pushed her forward. "Look at what the cat drug in, Slate." The loud conversation came to a dead halt, along with Faith's breath as every eye turned to her, but she wasn't overly concerned with the other occupants of the room, only with the man who lifted his head, then froze with his fingers steepled over the skinny end of the pool cue. He remained that way for what seemed like hours, or what seemed like hours to a woman whose knees had suddenly turned as limp as her hat hair. Someone coughed, and slowly he lifted his hand from the table and unfolded his body. He was tall. At least he looked tall to a woman who wasn't over 5'4" in heels. His chest wasn't big enough to land a 747 on, but it looked solid enough to hold up a weak-kneed woman. It tapered down to a smooth, flat cotton tucked into a leather belt minus the huge buckle. His jeans weren't tight or pressed with a long crease like most of the men in the room. Instead, they were soft, well-worn denim molded to his body, defining his long legs, muscular thighs, and slim hips. The hand that was not holding the cue stick lifted to push his misshapen, sweat-stained cowboy hat back on his high forehead, and a pair of hazel eyes stared back at her. A mixture of rich browns and deep greens. The eyes settled above a long, slim nose that boasted a tiny white scar across the bridge and mouth that was almost too perfect to belong to a man. It wasn't too wide or too small, the perfect top lip peeking nicely over the bottom. The corners hitched up in a smile. "Hog?" Hog? Her mind was still trying to deal with the raw, real sensuality of the man who stood before her. There was no way it could deal with the whole quote-unquote hog thing, especially when the man leaned his pool cue against the edge of the table and took a step toward her. She prepared herself for a loud whoop and a rough manhandling that would follow, but what she was not prepared for was the gentleness of the fingers that slid through her hair or coiled strength of her hand and pulled her closer, so the heat of the body was pressed up against hers, and she was definitely not prepared for the soft lips that was swooping down to bestow a kiss. It wasn't a long kiss or even a deep one. It was merely a touch, a teasing brush, a sweep of the sweet, moist flesh against the startled gloss, but it was enough to cause Faith's heart to bang against her ribs and her breath to leave in her lungs. Wow. Her hands came up and pressed against the heart of the chest in an effort to balance her suddenly tipsy world. Her eyelids, which she still hadn't even realized were closed, were fluttering open. Unlike her, he didn't look passion drugged, just cocky and confident. Don't tell me I left you speechless, darling. The words drizzled off his tongue like honey with a spoon, with very little twang and a whole lot of southern sizzle. She swallowed hard as Kenny spoke. She can't talk. She's got that there laryngitis, probably, from all that acting she's been doing. A smirk a mile wide spread across Slate's devastating, handsome face. Is that so? Well, now, ain't that an interesting state of affairs? Who cares if she can't talk, Coach? A man yelled behind him. You can call that a welcome home kiss? The two other men joined in. Yeah, Slate, I kiss my cousin better than that. That's 'cause you're married to her. And you got a problem with that? Shut up, you two, Kenny said. Come on, Slate. Remind her of what she's been missing out on. Give her the good stuff. A look of resignation entered those hazel eyes, a strange bedfellow for the dazzling grin. Sorry, Hog, he whispered right before he dipped his head in for another taste, except this time his lips were slightly parted and that soft kiss brought the promise of heat. If it hadn't been a whole year since she'd been kissed, she probably would have ignored that tremor that raced her through her body, and zing almost incinerated her. But it had been a year filled with loss, pain, and revelation. A year that made her cautious conformist want to be something different, something more like an arrogant rebel, Miss Hogg Collar of Haskin Counties, or Annie Oakley with a loaded gun. Or just a woman who gave a handsome cowboy a kiss that he wouldn't forget any time soon. With a moan, she threw her arms around his neck, knocking off his cowboy hat and forcing him to stumble to take a back step. A chorus of whoops and whistles erupted, but didn't faze her one-track mind, not when his lips were open wider, offering her up all that good stuff. Teetering on the tiptoes of her high heels, she drove her fingers into that silky waves of his hair, encasing his head and angling it so she had better access to the wet heat of his mouth. She dipped her tongue inside and sipped and tasted it, but it just was not enough. She wanted to consume this man, wanted to slide her fingers over every square inch of his fevered skin and sculptured muscles, wanted to press her nose into that spot between his neck and shoulder and fill her lungs up to capacity with smoky laundry detergents and a hymn. But most of all, she wanted to stare into those rich, fertile earth, an endless sea of eyes that see a reflection of her own desires or her own wants and needs. Slowly her eyes drifted open, but it wasn't her desire in the hazel depths, and it wasn't the cocky satisfaction. This time it looked more like a stunned disbelief. Obviously, Slate's relationship with Hope didn't involve sexual assault. Stunned by her uncharacteristic behavior, Faith pulled away from his lips and dropped back down to her heels. What had she been thinking? Had she lost her mind? How could she throw herself at a complete stranger, and not just any complete stranger, but Hope's close friend? Her gaze settled on those perfect lips that were slightly parted, wet, smeared with glittery passion fruit, and it became crystal clear why she lost her mind. The man was beyond hot. He was one sizzling stick of yummy, and she was a deprived child with a sweet tooth. That away, Hope, a man on the other side of the pool table yelled. You can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. Ooh-wee, Coach, it looks like you were missed. Someone else joined in. Does this mean you're staying, little bit? Kenny's friend stepped closer. Staying? A voice came from the back. With enthusiasm like that, I wouldn't let that woman out of my sight. Is that true, Slate? Kenny asked. You going to let Hope go back to Hollywood after that kind of greeting? Slate blinked once, twice, 3 times. Slowly the shock receded from his eyes, but his shoulders remained tense. He cleared his throat twice before he spoke, but it still didn't sound as smooth, as confident as it had. Well, I guess that depends. Depends on what? Someone asked. on whether or not she still likes me after she finds out I let the Plainsville Panthers whoop our butts. The room erupted in laughter, followed quickly with grumbled comments about hometown refs. Then a man with a huge belly and an even larger handlebar mustache pushed his way over. "All right, you've had your turn, Slate. Give someone else a chance to welcome our girl home." For a fraction of a second those hazel eyes narrowed, and the hands at her waist tightened, but then he released her, and she was passed from one big bear to the next, accompanied with a greeting, "Welcome home, Hope." But she wasn't Hope, but strangely enough, it did feel like home. Whew. Let's see. I want to try and get you guys to chapter 4 tonight, which is how many pages? Well, at least to this. I guess we're not. Okay, well, it looks like we can. I think we'll make it to this. I don't have it marked every single chapter, no, but just some pages amongst the pages. So I did mark chapter 2 to wet your whistle. Slate Calhoun sat back in the dark corner and watched the woman and. Oh, wait a minute. Nope. That page is not marked, Donna. I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Page 31. She allowed him to pull her along until they reached the truck parked by the door. "This is your truck?" Slate whirled around and stared at the woman, who sounded exactly like Hope, except with a really weird accent. He watched as those blue eyes widened right before her hand flew up to cover her mouth. The hard evidence of the betrayal caused his temper, that he had worked so hard at controlling, to rear its ugly head. And then he dropped her hand and jerked the door open of the truck. "Get in." She swallowed hard and shook her head. "I'd rather not. So I guess you'd rather stay here and find out how upset these folks get when I inform them that you've been playing them for fools." She cast a fearful glance back over her shoulder. "I'm not playing anyone for fool. I just want some answers." "Good, because that's exactly what I want." Slate pointed to the long bench of the seat in the truck. "Now get in." The sun had slipped close to the horizon, the last rays turning the sky, and the streaks in her hair, a deep red, looked so small standing so close to the large truck. Small and vulnerable, the image did what the Mexican daydreams couldn't. He released his breath. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you, but I am not going to let you leave without finding out why you're impersonating a close friend of mine. So you can either tell me or Sheriff Winslow." It was a lame threat. The only thing Sheriff Winslow was good at was bringing his patrol car to the games and turning on his siren and flashing lights when the Bulldogs scored a touchdown. But this woman didn't know that. Still, she didn't seem to be in a hurry to follow his orders either. "My car is parked over there," she said, pointing. "I'll meet you somewhere." "Not a chance. I wouldn't trust you as far as the little dusty ray can spit." She crossed her arms. "Well, I'm not going anyplace with a complete stranger." "Funny, but you didn't let that stop you from almost giving me a tonsillectomy," he said. A blush darkened her pale skin. The shy behavior was so unlike Hope that he almost smiled. Almost. She still needed to do some explaining. "So since we're establishing that we're well past the stranger stage, it shouldn't be a problem for you to take a ride with me." "I'm sorry, but I really couldn't go." Kenny charged out the door with the rest of the town hot on his heels. "Hey!" He pulled out a purse, if that's what you could call that huge brown leather bag. "Hope forgot her purse." Slate's gaze ran over the crowd. It circled again around, and "I guess everyone needed to come with you to give Hope her purse." "We just wanted to see how things were going." Tyler Jones, who owned the gas station, stepped up. "And to say goodbye to Hope," Miguel, the postmaster, piped in. There was a chorus of goodbyes, along with a multitude of invitations to supper. Then someone finally yelled, with everyone else wanted to go, "So what are you going to do with Hope now, Coach?" What he wanted to do was climb up in that truck and haul Bud out of there to go home and watch a game film, or better yet, pop in a Kenny Chesney CD and pursue the internet for pictures of Mexican hot spots. Anything to forget that he ever met this woman, or tasted her skin, or kissed her soft lips, or stared into those blue eyes that turned misty as she looked at the smiling faces surrounding them. It was watery, needy, and that look was deciding factor. "Well, I guess I'm going to do what I should have done all those years ago." He leaned down, heft her over one shoulder. She squealed and struggled as the crowd squirmed around them. Then he flipped her up in the seat and climbed in after her. "What's that?" Mrs. Murphy, the librarian, asked as she handed him a red high heel through the open window. After tossing it to the floor, Slate started the engine. It rumbled so loudly he had to yell to be heard. "Take her to bed." The woman next to him released a gasp, while poor Miss Murphy looked like she was about to pass out. Normally he would have apologized for his bad behavior, but normally he didn't have a beautiful impostor sitting next to him who made him angrier than losing a football game. He popped the truck into reverse and backed out, trying his damnedest to pull up the mental pictures of waving palm trees, brown-skinned beauties, and strong tequila. But that kept being erased by soft white skin, eyes as blue as the late September sky, and the smell of the skin-ripened peaches. The town of Bramble, Texas, watched as the truck rumbled over the curb and then took off down the street with stars and stripes, the Lone Star flag, Buster's ears flapping in the wind. "Isn't that the sweetest thing?" Twyla pressed a hand to her chest. "And Slate and Hope, the high school sweethearts, together again." "It sure is," Kenny Jean said. "Course there's no telling how long Hope will stay." "Yep, right." Pickett spit out a long steam of tobacco juice. "That Hollywood sure has brainwashed her. Hell, she couldn't even remember how to drink. Poor Slate," Mrs. Murphy tisked. "He'll have his hands full convincing her to stay and settle down." There were murmurs of agreement before Harley Sutter, the mayor, spoke up. "Course we could help him out with that." Rossie Owens pushed his cowboy hat back. "Well, we sure could." "Just a little help," Darla piped up. "Just enough to show Hope that all her dreams can be filled right here in Bramble." "Just enough to let love prevail," Sue Ellen agreed. "Just enough for wedding bells to ring," Twyla sighed. "Yep," Harley nodded just as he hitched up his pants. "Just enough." Faith was this redneck monster truck, a truck with huge flags fluttering and snapping in the breeze, a dog's wet nose pressed up against the back window, and the radio blaring out a song about putting a boot in someone's butt, while the arrogant rebel, who flaunted the size of his privates and that had the crude flowing through his veins, huge one wrist over the steering wheel, completely unconcerned that his huge tires straddled that yellow double line. She rechecked her seat belt, then placed both of her hands back on the dashboard. "Would you please stay on the side of the road?" She tried to speak over the music. When Slate shot a glance over at her, she cleared her throat. "Please?" One hazel eye squinted beneath the brim of his beat-up straw hat before he pulled the gaze away and continued to drive down the middle of the road. She probably should demand that he turn around and take her back to Bootlegger's, but there was something about the way his muscular body slouched in the seat that stole her breath from her lungs and stole the words from her mouth. Besides, it wasn't like the man was an axe murderer. He was a friend of Hope's. Unless Hope wasn't in Hollywood after all, but buried beneath this man's double wide. Faith glanced behind her, checking for an axe in the bed of the truck, but all she saw was empty beer cans and the dog with sad eyes. "I think your labradoodle's cold." Slate's head snapped around and his cowboy hat shifted with his eyebrows. "My what?" He reached over and turned down the radio. "Your labradoodle." Faith pointed at the back of the window. His gorgeous eyes popped wide. "Buster's not a labra—" He cut off as if he couldn't bring himself to say the word doodle. "He's a registered bird dog." "Are you sure? He looks just like my friend's dog that is a cross between a Labrador and a poodle." "Poodle?" His brows knotted. "He's no poodle. He's a purebred hunting dog." "Oh, well, I think he's cold." "Cold?" he snorted. "It has to be at least every 71 side." "Then why is he staring at me?" "Probably because he's trying to figure out who the hell this fussy woman is parading around as his Hope." "Fussy? I'm not fussy." Faith's teeth rattled as Slate turned up a dirt road. The truck dipped and bounced over every rut and rock, jostling the empty fast food cups and bags that littered on the floor. "Really?" He glanced, pointed at her fingers that were white-knuckling the dash. "Afraid to let go?" She only shrugged. "I'm careful, that's all." "Careful, fussy, same difference. I bet you haven't even been four-wheeling before." "Of course I have." The truck bounced down in a hole, jostling her reply right out of her, and she glanced over and caught him staring down at the front of her sweater. The heavy-lidded look he sent her made her heart race to her side both of what was affecting her. She jerked her hands off the dash and she crossed her arms over her chest. For the next few miles neither one spoke. It was hard to speak with your insides were being jarred out without the dash to stabilize her. Faith felt like she was back in high school gym class when she was paired with a more aggressive teenager on the trampoline. Never the bouncer, always the bouncee. She glanced behind her to see how the Buster was holding up. Oh, my God, stop! Slate slammed on his brakes, and the truck's tires locked and skidded a few feet. What? Your dog! She pointed out the empty window. Your dog fell out! After the confusion cleared from his eyes, he shook his head. Geez Louise. He gunned the truck and took it off again, and this time in the direction of a copse of trees, a rarity in the barren Texas landscape. But your dog is fine. He tapped on the back window with his elbow, and the dog's head reappeared. He was just lying down. Oh. Her face was heating up. He flashed a cocky grin. City girl, I take it. Faith nodded. East Chicago? Yeah, that explains the weird accent. Before she could argue over who had the weirdest accent, Slate whipped around a large cottonwood and a cluster of wind-ravaged elms to reveal a breathtaking sunset, vibrant orange flames up the horizon to merge with the deep grays and purples of wispy clouds, with the black silhouettes of fence posts, power lines, and a large duck-headed beast with pulled up from the ground stood again with the color of charcoal drawings on an acrylic painting. What do you call those? Faith pointed to one of the knotted oil pumps. A pump jack. He turned off the engine, and Buster let out a howling bark and flew past her window. She started to voice her alarm, but then thought of it. If the cute dog got eaten by some wild animal, who was she to complain? Besides, his owner didn't seem to be too concerned. Slate unfastened his seat belt and slouched back in the corner of the truck, stretching his long legs out towards her. So, who are you? Unable to stop herself, Faith watched as Buster bounded through the dry, thick glass, scarring up the flocks of birds before disappearing into a jagged crevice lined with bushy vegetation. She pointed a finger at the windshield. Slate groaned. He's fine, but he's not going to be if you don't start talking. She pulled her gaze away from the spot where the dog had disappeared, but it was hard to talk when facing such raw sexuality. So instead she stared down at the round, scuffed toes of Slate's brown boots. Faith Aldridge. So, Faith Aldridge, what brings you to Bramble? The weather. The smart-ass reply surprised her. She had never been a smart-ass. It had to be the tequila. Yeah, that explained it. The tequila had to be responsible for all her inappropriate thoughts and that behavior thus far. You look like wind, drought, hailstorms, and tornadoes, do you? He took off his hat and flipped it up at the dashboard. Let's try this again. What brings you to Bramble? She would have loved to wipe that smirk off his face with some whooping good lie, but she couldn't think of one, not even a wimpy one. Besides, she had only herself to blame for being in this predicament. If she hadn't posed as Hope, she wouldn't be stuck in a king-size truck with a king-size cocky cowboy. My sister, just saying the words caused her stomach to flutter. Slate's eyes widened. Hope? She nodded. Pulling his feet off the edge of the seat, he sat up. Twins? Yes. A slow whistle escaped through his teeth. But how? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I've known Hope and her family for years. I've never heard anything about some long-lost twin sister. All the bitterness she felt over the last few months came back in full force. It didn't make any sense to her either. How could her mother keep that secret, and why would she want to? A person had a right to know if they had a sister, especially a twin sister. Obviously, Faith said dryly. Her adopted mother failed to mention it. Mine didn't say anything until she knew she was dying. His hazel eyes grew even more surprised. Hope's adopted? It was her turn to be shocked. She doesn't know? He turned away, then quickly turned back again. And you know that for a fact? Maybe your mother was mistaken. Mistaken? His gaze ran from the top of her head to the tip of her red shoes. No, I guess not. Releasing a long rush of breath, he ran a hand down over the back of his neck. Hope's adopted. Damn, this can't be good. I'd like to think she knows that this has all been kept a secret all these years, but Hope isn't the type to keep secrets, nor is she the type who likes surprises. She has the right to know, Faith stated, although she couldn't help but the quaver in her voice. She had been nervous enough to show up on her sister's doorstep unannounced. The news her sister wasn't aware she was adopted would be tripled her apprehension. You're right, Slate said, though I hate to be the one to tell her. Faith swallowed hard at the thought of breaking the news to the woman who brandished a gun, on stage or off. Still, she had come too far to go back now. So do you have her address and phone number? I'd love to help you out with that one, darling, but I have neither one. But I thought you and Hope were good friends. We are, he shrugged. We've both been a little busy this last year. She leaned forward, stretching out her seatbelt. A year? You haven't talked to her in a year? He held up her hand. Now calm down. I haven't talked to her as much, but her mama calls her every week, and from what I hear, Hope is doing just fine. Relieved, she relaxed back against the seat. Oh, well, do you think her mother would give me her information? Slate hooked his arm over the steering wheel and stared out the windshield. Hell, I don't know. The Jenna Scroggs I know wouldn't mind at all, but then again, the Jenna I know wouldn't keep a secret from her daughter. But it doesn't matter, seeing as how as she and Burl are in Lubbock visiting Jenna Jr., who won't be back until Monday. He glanced over at her. Unless you want to wait. No, Faith shook her head. I need to find her. Finding Hope had become a relentless need, something that pulled her through her mother's diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, the 9 months of suffering, the funeral, the quiet loneliness that filled her life afterward. Besides her aging aunt, Hope was the only family Faith had left, and she wasn't willing to live without her sister for longer than it took to reach California, even if Hope didn't like surprises. So I guess that explains why you're here, Slate broke into her thoughts, although it didn't explain why you're impersonating Hope. Embarrassed by the stupid charade, Faith turned away and looked out the side window. I thought I would get more information that way. He snorted. Hell, darling, all you had to do was ask. There's no secrets in Bramble. At least I didn't think there were. He sat back against the seat. So without her address and phone number, how do you plan on finding her? It was a good question. Finding her sister in a small town in Texas was nothing compared to finding her in a huge town with millions of people. Suddenly, the feeling exhausted and defeated, she slumped back in the seat. I don't know. He nodded as if somehow understood her irrational behavior and then stared at the sunset for a few moments before he spoke. I guess if you give me the number, I can call you back with the information when Jenna and Burl get back. She glanced over. You would do that? I don't see why not. Any sister of Hope is a sister of mine. He flashed that sexy smile, slightly dazed She took a while to locate her gel pen and notepad in her purse after writing down her name, number, and carefully tore it off the piece of paper and handed it to him. He studied it brief before he folded it and stuffed it in the pocket of his shirt. Well, he said, the word just hung there until Faith realized he was waiting for her to finish it. Oh, yes, well, I guess you better take me back to the car. She paused. You were planning on taking me back to my car, aren't you? He rolled his eyes. No, I plan on keeping you out here at Sutter Springs all night long. Sutter Springs? She looked all around. Where are the springs? Slate laughed, almost as sexy as his smile. Mostly dried up by the overpumping of the groundwater for irrigation, but if you walk down to that arrow, he pointed toward the spot where Buster had disappeared, you'll find enough water to get your feet wet, although people don't come out here for the water. Faith leaned closer to the windshield. Can your dog swim? He's a hunting dog, for God's sakes. Of course he can swim. She turned back to him. So what do people come out here for? Slate shot her a suggestive look and her face heated. Oh. He chuckled. You sure get flustered easy. I don't think I remember Hope blushing. Faith wasn't surprised. It seemed she and her sister had nothing in common. She still refused to stop searching for similar traits. So tell me about her. His eyes squinted. Hope? When she nodded, he shrugged. She's Hope. Sassy and controlling, smart and funny, determined, stubborn. He smiled and stared off as if he was conjuring up her image. Never seen a woman who loves to set goals as much as she does. She was the busiest little bee you'll ever see in a high school. Did she go to college? She was saving up to, but then Hollywood distracted her. The sun slipped farther beneath the horizon, replacing the vibrant colors with soothing pastels. The hours spent on the back road finally caught up with her, and she leaned back rested her head against the window. So I guess she's a talented actress. There was a long pause, and she glanced over. Slate slouched back against the door, his eyes crinkled in thought. Talented, I don't know if I'd go that far. Entertaining probably is a better word. So she's not any good? A mournful howl brought her head up. Is that a coyote? Nope, just Buster. He must have found something. Faith rested her head back and tried not to think about the somethings that were wandering around in the growing dark, waiting to jump through the open window. You really do look like her, you know. She turned. Slate stared back at her across the worn leather, the last sparkle of sunlight highlighting his wheat-colored hair, dusting his long lashes and reflecting off the gold flecks in his eyes. I do? She asked. Identical. A corner of his mouth tipped up, except for the hair and those. He reached over and tapped her lips with his index finger. My lips? No, your straight teeth. Hope has a crooked one. The thought of a crooked-toothed sister made her smile. I had braces. And a scissor-happy barber. Again his hand reached out, but this time it seemed in no hurry to leave. His warm fingers brushed over her forehead and slid through the strands of her hair. But I guess it's not so bad. You mean it's kind of cute in a sort of ugly kind of way? She made a lame attempt at country's Kenny's country twang. The grin got wider, revealing a set of perfect teeth. Something like that. And that is where we're going to stop until tomorrow. So we're going to start in tomorrow on page 58. So I think that's a pretty good start. And thank you for tuning in. Make sure you're keeping your social distance. Make sure you're washing your hands, staying 3 feet apart, wearing your mask. When you can't wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer. Stay safe, well, and healthy. Hope that you have joy, faith, love, definitely love in your heart and in your bank account. Much prosperity as well. This book is so charming and so cute. And these two sisters are more like night and day, but they're identical twins. So to hear both stories, you have to stay tuned. I really have enjoyed this book. It cheered me up when I was feeling blue and brought me lots and lots of joy. Knowing that love and laughter can both coexist. And he finds her so different from the sister of hope that attraction brings him closer to faith. But will that attraction conquer all if hope returns? Only one way to find out. Stay tuned for the next book review, or should I say book moments. We haven't got to the actual rating yet, so it might be a little bit. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Thank you for always tuning in to every video. Thank you. God bless. Stay safe. Stay well. Remember, it's better to give than to receive. And I hope a lot of you remember that. God bless. Till next time.